Imagine you're standing in the middle of an early winter forest with no grain, no potatoes, nothing that modern people would even call food. And yet medieval people still walked into the hunger season with something that sounds insane at first. They turned tree bark into bread, but not the rough, hard bark we see today. What they were after was the nearly transparent cambium layer between the wood and the outer bark, the place where all the tree's nutrients flow, up and down like a silent bloodstream, keeping the whole trunk alive. Take it the wrong way, and the tree dies. Take it the right way, and your family survives one more season.
We should have enough now.
Medieval foragers knew they had to cut the bark vertically, so they wouldn't sever the tree's lifeline. Then peel off the pale, slightly chewy cambium. Chew it like gum for its sweetness. Slice it into strips to fry into what they called forest bacon. Or dry it and grind it into flour, mixing it in the precise ratio of 1 part bark flour to 2 parts grain flour. Elm gave the thickest cambium, pine was the easiest to find, and birch was sweet but thin. They just had to avoid trees with white sap or anything in the poisonous family like yew or cherry. What surprises most people is that this flour didn't just provide calories. It also replaced minerals that were dangerously lacking during the long, exhausting winter months. If you ever thought bark is just forest trash, this video might make you rethink that. Drop a comment and tell us if you knew about this technique before, and if you found it useful, you know what to do next. There's a secret medieval people understood clearly, but modern people often overlook. If you ever have to find food in the forest during months of famine, don't look down at the ground. Look up at the trunks of dead trees. That's where, between layers of rotting wood and damp, cold shadows, they found the safest source of winter protein and vitamins. Medieval foragers knew that mushrooms growing from soil always carried risk because deadly species like deathcap looked no different from edible ones. But mushrooms growing on wood were almost impossible to confuse, and their world was far richer than most people imagine. They had 3 allies they never misidentified. Oyster mushrooms growing in layered shelves like tree ears, chicken of the woods burning bright orange on oak trunks, and chaga, black as charcoal, clinging to birch, both food and medicine at once. The survival rule was simple. Only pick what they had seen adults eat many times. Always cook them to break down natural toxins, then dry or smoke them to save for the months when the entire village had not a single grain left. Thanks to that method, medieval people didn't just survive. They maintained a stable source of B vitamins through a winter when nothing else could grow. If you've ever walked past a fallen tree without looking closely, you might have missed an entire food shelf in the sky. Give yourself a new perspective and share whether you've ever seen any of these mushrooms in real life. Among all the survival techniques medieval people left behind, nothing shocks modern readers more than this truth. The very poisonous seeds we avoid at all costs once kept all of Europe alive through its worst famine years. And here's the twist that surprises everyone. They didn't just make these seeds safe, they turned them into flour more nutritious than many modern grains. At the top of the list is the acorn. In its natural state, an acorn is packed with tannins strong enough to send you into stomach-wrenching cramps or vomiting. But medieval foragers knew how to pour out the poison through an almost perfect process. Crack the shell, grind it coarse, then soak it for days in running spring water so the flow washes out the tannins. or boil it repeatedly until the water shifts from brown to clear. The result is a mildly nutty flour rich in manganese, copper, magnesium, and an amino acid profile that outperforms many cultivated grains. It's a strange paradox. The food modern people see as forest trash was once the lifesaver of an agricultural system collapsing under cold climate. And it wasn't just acorns. Medieval people also harvested nettle seeds, something most people today dismiss as weeds. These tiny grains, when roasted to a coffee-like aroma, contain up to 25% protein and natural omega-3s, a nutrient reservoir that kept countless families alive during the lean months. What's admirable is that they didn't guess their way through it. Every region had its own method of detoxing, fermenting, or roasting, all built on generations of hard-earned survival experience. If you've ever thought poison seeds, cheese, inedible, this might change your perspective. Leave a comment and tell us whether you'd dare try acorn flour at least once. Who knows? You might be as surprised as the people who first discovered it. Between the silent fields left dead after the first winter and the granaries long emptied, medieval foragers didn't look to the sky for luck. They bent down to the ground, literally. And what's astonishing is that things that looked like old stumps, wilted weeds, or muddy thickets of thorns were actually the most reliable source of carbohydrates for the entire village during famine years, if you knew how to find them at the right moment. Burdock meant nothing to most people, but medieval families knew only the first-year roots were edible. Soft, sweet, and packed with inulin that kept energy levels steady. They marked burdock patches in spring, waited until autumn when the plant had pushed all its nutrients back into the root, and only then dug them up, a kind of long-term investment. Few modern people even think about. Dandelion became essential in the early spring months, when every other food source had practically disappeared. As long as you harvested it before the plant flowered, the roots held astonishing amounts of vitamin A, vitamin C, iron, and calcium. They roasted the roots until dark brown, ground them into a bitter but warming drink, and used it to push back the hopelessness of cold nights. Jerusalem artichokes, growing wild along forest edges, were the safest option. They grew in clusters, tasted sweet and crisp, could be eaten raw or cooked, and were especially rich in inulin, a nutrient medieval people didn't know by name, but understood perfectly every time they felt they could hold on longer after eating it. If you ever assumed the ground held nothing but rotten roots, you might be surprised to learn entire medieval winters were survived, thanks to these overlooked underground foods. Have you ever tried looking for burdock or Jerusalem artichoke in the wild? Share your experience below. During those unusually long winters, when meat was gone, fish couldn't be caught, and livestock had grown so thin they were little more than skin stretched over bone, medieval foragers had a secret that makes modern people shiver. They didn't look for protein in the fields. They looked inside trees that were falling apart. Split open a piece of wood rotted soft as a sponge, and you'd find what they called the white meat of the forest. Fat, round larvae, richer in protein than beef and containing enough fat to keep a family alive for days. What's interesting is that medieval people didn't see this as desperation. To them, wood-boring larvae were the cleanest protein source because they fed on cellulose, not carrion. They knew how to pick the right type of hardwood decaying at just the right stage, avoiding any log near animal remains or anything with a strange smell. Preparation was simple but precise. Skewer the larvae, roast them until the outside turned golden and crisp, the inside soft like almond butter, the aroma so rich that some regions of medieval Europe even considered them a famine delicacy. During sieges or years of back-to-back crop failures, many monasteries even recorded harvesting methods for larvae as an official survival skill. If you've always thought bugs, akika's dirty, this idea might make you question your entire food system. Would you dare try it if you were in a medieval situation? Leave a comment and share what you think. If there's one part of medieval survival history that people misunderstand the most, it's the strange relationship between humans and the sea. When granaries were empty, when every edible root had been dug up, when cattle froze to death one by one in long, punishing blizzards, many coastal communities didn't wait for miracles. They walked straight to the rocky shore in the flesh-cutting wind, scraped off the torn seaweed, smashed by waves, and brought home something modern people can hardly believe once saved entire villages: seaweed. The shocking part is that the red algae they relied on, dulse, is the very thing tourists step over without noticing every time they stroll along the beach. Medieval people didn't eat seaweed out of curiosity. They ate it because they knew it held minerals the land couldn't provide, especially iodine, the element that kept the thyroid from collapsing during long winters, when hormonal imbalance could lead to exhaustion, delirium, even fainting. Irish moss had a role so legendary, it borders on myth. Boiled with milk and a bit of honey, it turned into a warm, thick, mineral-rich gel porridge, strong enough to pull the sick back from the edge of malnutrition. For many regions, it was a winter talisman, passed down through generations, the thing that carried them through famine. Years that history books only mention in fragments. And it wasn't just the sea. Villages near rivers and lakes relied on watercress, mustard water, sorrel, water plants that absorbed minerals from flowing streams, far stronger than anything grown in poor soil.
Keep moving.
They didn't see the world the way we do, where modern people see slippery moss. They saw a mineral resource that could save a child from a hungry winter. If you've ever thought seaweed was just ocean trash, this story might change the way you look every time you step across a wet shoreline. Have you ever tasted dulse or Irish moss? Share your thoughts. You might find yourself just as surprised as the people who first discovered them. Among all the unbelievable foods of the medieval world, lichens, the gray patches clinging to cold rocks, might be the one that makes modern people shudder the most. It doesn't look like food at all. It looks like dust the wind forgot to blow away. And yet, in parts of northern Europe where winters stretched for half the year, that dust kept whole families alive. But to make lichens edible, medieval people had to perform a ritual both meticulous and unsettling. Boil, discard, boil, discard, repeating the cycle until the ink-black water slowly turned clear. They called it washing away the bitterness of death, because skipping this step could leave the eater vomiting or doubled over in pain. What's astonishing is that even though they knew it tasted like diluted poison, they still did it, because the alternative was starvation. In the Arctic, the story went even further. The Sami and many reindeer hunting communities knew lichens were only truly digestible after being pre-processed in an animal's stomach. When slaughtering a reindeer in winter, they would take the half-fermented lichen mixture from its gut, boil it again, and eat it like a medicinal porridge. It sounds horrifying, but for them, it was a survival secret. that carried one generation after another through brutal winters. If you've always thought lichen was just useless crust stuck in rock crevices, this story might change your mind. Would you dare try this lichen porridge if you were in a medieval situation? Share your thoughts. During the Great Famine of 1315, when cold rain wouldn't stop and crops rotted right on the fields, many medieval families survived thanks to something modern people would swear is a myth. They ate earth, not scooping handfuls of dirt into their mouths in blind desperation, but through a real process, careful, deliberate, and more psychologically painful than any food they ever consumed. They searched for clean clay in red, yellow, or white tones along stream banks, dried it, crushed it, and ground it into powder as fine as flour. Then they sifted out the grit, mixed the clay into a thin porridge made from whatever scraps were left, bits of tree bark, strands of old grass, or a few spoiled grains. The mixture offered almost no nutrition, but it soothed the twisting pain of an empty stomach, giving them one more day to search for something that could actually keep them alive. The greatest paradox of geophagy is this: Earth didn't save people, but it helped them survive long enough to be saved. And that's the quiet tragedy of medieval life. People forced to swallow something that wasn't food just to hold on to a sliver of hope inside a body that was already collapsing. If you've ever thought, "I'd never eat dirt," try imagining a 6-month winter with no other option left. What do you think you would do in that situation? Share your thoughts. In the worst famine years, when barns held no animals, granaries held nothing but straw dust, and people had already eaten roots, moss, and anything that could be scraped from the earth, medieval families entered the final stage of desperation, eating the very objects that once symbolized their honor, their trade, and their status. This wasn't just eating shoes to stay alive. It was the moment when every social class, from peasants to knights, lost the last layer of power they had left. Imagine a blacksmith, the strongest man in the village, holding the leather belt that had followed him through dozens of winters, now dropping it into a pot of water, boiling it hour after hour until the rock-hard hide softened and melted into a thick, pungent broth, with just enough collagen to keep his family breathing for one more day. Or a monk, a man who had spent his life copying manuscripts, now scraping a thin layer of leather from a prayer book cover to turn into a watery porridge. A sight modern people would call tragic, but for them, it was a calculated survival strategy. And here's the biggest twist. The more leather a family owned, belts, soft armor, saddles, scabbards, the higher their chances of surviving. Power in those years had nothing to do with silver or gold. In famine years, it came down to how many leather objects you could afford to sacrifice. What would you think if one day the thing keeping your family alive was an item you always believed was for use, not food? Share your thoughts below. There's a truth most modern people can barely imagine. Medieval people didn't survive winter because of luck. They survived because they had a mindset completely different from ours. To them, the world wasn't divided into food and not food, the way we think today. In their eyes, everything around them could become a source of life, if prepared correctly, if they dared to try it, and if they accepted that the price of a mistake could be an entire winter. Because of this mentality, they saw bread in tree bark, meat inside rotting wood, minerals in stone lichens, vitamins in seaweed, and even energy in handfuls of clay along the riverbank. They understood that nature never completely closes the door to survival. Humans only fail when they don't know where to look. Harsh climate, repeated crop failures, and relentless hunger forced them to develop something we rarely use today: the ability to read the language of the environment, to see survival clues hidden inside things that look meaningless. What astonishes us isn't the 10 not-food foods they relied on, but the way they turned the entire world into a giant pantry. From icy coastlines to wet forests, from mountain rocks to decaying trunks. And the greatest lesson isn't in the techniques themselves, but in the perspective. We aren't lacking resources, we're lacking the ability to recognize them. If this story changed the way you see nature, or simply made you curious about how our ancestors survived, leave a comment and tell us what impressed you the most. And if you want to keep exploring the survival secrets history has hidden for far too long, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.